Hi guys, Sean Griffin with Kingdom in Context. I want to tell you just real quick, we're going to be doing 6-week courses that we've made available for you, the viewer. If you're interested to know more about the gospel of the kingdom as taught by Yeshua, not only throughout the gospels, but all throughout the prophets, throughout the American Canon of 66, and even including the Apocryphal books, I've put together a 6-week course that ties together all that information. We did this course a few months ago. We had a great turnout, great participation. People really seemed to get a lot out of it. The other course that we're offering is over the book of Enoch. So 6 weeks, intensive study, breakdown, dissect the book of Enoch. We'll find all the parallels that are already built into the American Canon of 66 that lines up with the message that's within Enoch. We felt that Enoch was an important book to offer as part of one of these courses because the claim of the book of Enoch itself is that it was written for a distant and remote generation, also for a generation that's keeping the law in the last days. And I don't know what other generation that could be speaking of other than ours. We're excited to offer those two. We think they'll be super beneficial. The message of the Messiah and then the prophecies for these end times as far as these last days. And these are two important messages that we feel we would want our audience to be very well versed in so that you guys can share the beautiful story and beautiful message of hope to all those around you, your friends and family. The information for the courses is in the links below in the video description. Each course, there's a video conference every week. So you get to actually talk with me in video conference and ask questions about the course material. We can also, many people just ask questions of all kinds, but we try to keep it focused on the course material as much as possible, as much as that was relatable. But I do also answer general questions and answers during that time as well. So it was a really fun, interactive time of fellowship, just digging in and dissecting the Word. And we had a great time. So we're going to offer it again, and you guys are welcome to go check those out. The classes are going to begin December 15th, and it's first come, first serve. I only have so many spots I can facilitate for the way the courses go, as far as holding how many per class. So go check it out, inquire. I'll get you all the information. Either message me through at kingdomincontext@gmail.com or also through our Facebook Messenger page. Many of you are friends with me on Facebook. You can just message me privately if you like as well. But either way, let me know, and I'll send you all the information about the course, and we'll see if we can get you in as soon as possible. Hello, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome back to Kingdom Portions here on Kingdom in Context. I'm Sean Griffin, and I'm accompanied here with my lovely co-host.
Hey guys, I'm Lindsay Griffin. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, sweetie.
Shabbat Shalom, love.
Here on Kingdom in Context, the whole premise here is that we try to keep the scriptures in context. So I've created this context tree with different themes layered as the branches of the context tree. And I've already made several videos pertaining to certain branches on the tree, and I'm continuing to make more videos that addresses all the branches. Because to me, from years and years of studying the Bible, understanding those major themes on the context tree helps the Bible be very easy to read, so that you always know, because these are the major themes repeated constantly throughout the book. So I wanted to help pass that on and share that with others so they can read the Bible and just read it like a normal book and already know the context of things being spoken of. And so that's why I created that tree and the branches there. So you're welcome to peruse the channel and look and see at the other videos we have, especially like Morning Cup of Context seem to be really popular. People like those, where I do little topical segments and break down very famous passages in the scriptures that are taken out of context, and we look at it in its context to try to understand it. So, and the links are in the description below. Should the Father put it on your heart, you like what we're doing, you want to see us do this full time, which is our prayer, which is what we feel called to do, and you want us to visit our Patreon or our PayPal, where you can actually help us do that. So prayerfully consider that. We appreciate it. Okay, this week, sweetie, I'm excited. Last week was a lot of fun. We got to tackle the Tower of Babel for a little bit. We want to do entire videos on the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
But we got to dive into the Tower of Babel a little bit. We could probably do 4 or 5 special isolated videos just on the Tower of Babel. There's so much fun stuff there, and how relevant it still is to our life.
Right.
But we got to do that as well as look at circumcision.
Yes.
Okay. And as we said before, in these Kingdom portions, we're covering large swaths of chapters to fit this all in a 52-week time period. So as a result of that, sometimes we may read 5 or 6 chapters and only get to cover 1 or 2 major themes from those 5 or 6 chapters. Like last week, we just covered the Tower of Babel and the covenant of circumcision and how they're related. So if you didn't check that out, go check that out. It was a lot of fun. This week, we're jumping Genesis 18 through 22, and we're going to be pairing some things up from the New Testament, also called the Brit Hadasha, from Hebrews, 2 Peter, Book of Matthew. We're also going to be using the extra biblical book of Jubilees, and going to be discussing some of the things there. So, I mean, this is an exciting episode because we get to look at Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
Right? We get to see more of Abraham's shenanigans, and we get to see some, the big moment with Abraham and Isaac on Mount Moriah, which I think we found something really special while doing a study for this that I'd never seen before. And it's particularly about Isaac and the whole moment there with Abraham taking up the mountain. And I just think it's fascinating. I really do. It connects so many parts of the scripture. Stick with us to the end, guys, because I think you're really going to be blessed by it. So thanks for joining us. Do you want to start reading, or would you like me to, sweetie?
I'll start us off.
Okay.
All right, so we're in chapter 18. All right. Now the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, and bowed himself to the earth, and said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, and I will bring a piece of bread, that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, So do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah, and said, Quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes. Abraham also ran to the herd, and took a tender and choice calf, and gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk, and the calf which he had prepared, and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. Then they said to him, Where is Sarah your wife? And he said, There in the tent. He said, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah your wife will have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, After I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? And the Lord said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I indeed bear a child when I am so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah denied it, however, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, No, but you did laugh. Then the men rose up from there, and looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off. The Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed? For I have chosen him, so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. And the Lord said, The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now, and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know. Then the men turned away from there, and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Abraham came near, and said, Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away, and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? So the Lord said, If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare the whole place on their account. And Abram replied, Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord, although I am but dust and ashes. Suppose the 50 righteous are lacking 5. Will you destroy the whole city because of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. He spoke to him yet again and said, Suppose 40 are found there. And he said, I will not do it on account of the 40. Then he said, Oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak. Suppose 30 are found there. And he said, I will not do it if 30 are found there. And he said, Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of the 20. Then he said, Oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak only this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of the 10. As soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place.
First thing, baby, that pops up, I love verse 19. right? Because he talks about how they knew Abraham would teach his descendants
Yes.
the righteousness of God, the Torah.
Yeah, the way of the Lord is to do righteousness and justice.
So that's just amazing. It's like they had that faith in him already. He'd already proven himself that they knew that. Well, I think it's fascinating that, they named him Isaac. And that's what we don't get in Genesis, but we do get in Jubilees, chapter 16, verse 2 or 3, I believe, is when the angel showed up to tell her she would be pregnant, they also told her his name would be Isaac.
Yeah.
And they said it's written and ordained on the heavenly tablets for his name to be Isaac.
And what does his name mean?
His name means laughter. So they already knew that Abraham and Sarah were going to laugh when they got the news they were going to be old and have a kid. That he was 90 and he was 100. He was 99. Was that what it was?
Something like that.
98-ish, and she was like 90. And so
they definitely had their AARP cards. Let's say that
they did, and they both laughed at what seemed ludicrous to them.
Yeah.
And the angels are like, "You laugh? Is anything impossible for God?" And it was apparently already ordained and written on the heavenly tablets his name. Yeah. So I just think that's fascinating, and because that's why I love stuff like Jubilees, because it gives you a little bit of extra stuff that makes so much sense. And then something else. What else sticks out in there?
Well, one thing that definitely sticks out to me is verse 8, where Abraham is definitely not keeping kosher here.
That's right.
With him serving the milk and the calf.
Okay, guys, there is I can't, it's in Deuteronomy somewhere, I believe, but there is a law about do nots, and it's about pagan practices, okay? And it was in discouraging the children of Israel from participating in the pagan practices that they formerly had participated in while in Egypt. And one of them was cooking, goat meat or lamb meat in the mother's milk. Okay, and I don't know what that's about. I'm not a witch or a warlock, so I don't know why they would do that in the recipe there, but it is commanded to them not to do that. So as a result, over time, Rabbinic Judaism has taken that, and they've added to that an increasingly large amount of instruction that they claim is how you can avoid doing that. So the point is, here in this chapter we read where he's serving food to these angels. Mm-hmm. He serves them goat and milk and meat at the same time. Now, Sarah didn't prepare the goat in the mother's milk. That's not even mentioned.
Right.
But the reason why people would make the joke that you made, why you brought it up, was because of the Talmudic Rabbinic Judaism law, which is not the law of God, which is not in the Bible, but because of what they've added to it from their own opinions, people think that this is now, you cannot eat meat and milk together.
All kinds of things. They go into all, we actually looked it up, and it's just amazing. You can't have a cheeseburger. I mean, you can read some of these things.
Yeah, so check it out, guys. Here's what is claimed to be taught by rabbis concerning this topic. So remember, as I'm reading this, the original command in the Torah was just do not boil goat meats in the mother's milk. Yeah. Okay? Very simple. All right. The Torah is somewhat vague, though, in defining the parameter. This is what I read from studying the Talmud site.
It's the main organization for Talmud.
It's called Chabad.org.
Yeah, Chabad.
And it's basically like a Judaism website, basically. Okay, so they're trying to explain this concept that they keep and that they want everyone else to keep.
Yeah.
So they claim that the Torah is vague in defining the parameters of the instruction, and the rabbis felt it was necessary to add further restrictions for safeguarding. They felt that without these additional prohibitions, people would mistakenly think that it is only forbidden to actually cook a baby goat in its mother's milk.
Now, that's exactly what the commandment says.
It's exactly what it says. So this introduction to the actual extra rules they've added to the basic commandment, in the introduction, they're ignoring the basic commandment.
They're afraid that people might just take that commandment for exactly what it says.
It's wild. It's wild. It's doublethink. So anyway, some of the things they've added to it over the years is that they claim that the law only prohibits the cooking and the eating of the meat of a domesticated animal in the milk. But the rabbis added that one may also not cook or eat the meat of a kosher wild animal or bird with milk. So it went from cooking instructions to actually what you can put on your plate together.
The construction of your actual meal.
You can no longer eat this type of meat with milk, which is crazy. And they get that apparently from the Code of Jewish Law, Yoreh Dia, chapter 87 and line 3. They say that Torah law only prohibits the consumption of meat that was cooked with milk. That's actually not what it even says.
Yeah.
So that's not even okay. So again, they're working off a false premise. They're working off not obeying the simple instruction and the command. And the rabbis added, saying that one may not eat one may not eat meat and milk together, even if they were not cooked together. And it's in the code of Jewish law. Looks like maybe chapter 89, line 1 or whatever. So the point is, they've now went further. Instead of just saying you can't put them together on your plate, it's basically saying you can't even cook them together, right? Not just that you can't eat meat and milk together, but you can't even cook them together.
No, that's the first one is saying not to cook them together, and the second one is saying you can't eat them together even if they were not cooked together.
Oh, they were not cooked together. That's right. We're reading it off the screen. I'm going to put it on the screen for the viewers as we talk about this, though. So that they were not even cooked together. So that's
right.
That's
so
interesting.
A lot of kosher meals, they will bring you the meat, and you'll eat the meat, and then anything and it's not just milk. This is all dairy products.
That's right.
They cannot have dairy products and kosher meat on the same plate. They won't even use the same plate. They'll either wash the plate completely and then put the dairy products on it, or they'll get out completely new, fresh plates and, put the dairy on it, whatever order they do it in, but they won't even have them on the same plate.
I want to remind the viewer that what we're explaining is not in the scriptures.
Right.
This is from Jewish law, from rabbinical literature, mostly found in the Talmud of Jewish law, that we do not abide by. We're not telling you to do this. We're just comparing and contrasting what the actual law says and what Abraham's behavior is with these angels compared to what rabbis have added to it over time.
And this is exactly what our Messiah was fighting with them about constantly. He was not upset with them for keeping the Torah. He was upset with them for adding all these other commandments to the Torah that would end up causing people to break the Torah anyways.
Right, and it becomes just an extra burden.
Yeah.
And he was claiming the Pharisees, who were teaching, promoting, and keeping this rabbinical law, were not even keeping the God's law called the Torah. So that's what in Matthew 23 addresses their hypocrisy. But the third addition that rabbis have added to this concept over time is they instituted that one must wait a certain amount of time between eating meats and drinking milk. And the rabbis decreed that the two acquaintances may not share a table if one is eating dairy products and the other is eating meat products. Think about that, guys.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is supposedly in Code of Jewish Law. I think it's chapter 88, maybe. But the point is,
when you keep kosher, this is something I've learned. I actually listened to a really popular Orthodox Jew. He's got a YouTube show and podcast and everything. I'm sure you guys might know who I'm talking about. But he always talks about how when he goes out to eat.
You said Orthodox Jew, just so they're not confused. He's a Messianic. Are we talking about?
No, I'm talking about Ben Shapiro.
Oh, no.
Ben Shapiro is always talking about
how... I thought you were talking about M2I.
No. Ben Shapiro is always talking about how, because he keeps kosher, he can't go to any restaurant. Which is why he says part of the reason he stays in L.A., because there's lots of kosher restaurants there. But what this means is, back in the kitchen, they're not, it's the way they're cooking everything and keeping everything separated. It's not just he needs to go to a restaurant that offers, clean meats. He's got to go to restaurants that do everything according to these laws and how they're cooking everything.
Right. And again, I'm trying to painstakingly address these quote-unquote laws that we just mentioned are not in the Bible.
Right.
This is in something else of rabbinical Talmudic Judaism that we do not profess, we do not teach, and we encourage you not to follow. It's a different religion altogether. It adds to the Word of God, which is instructed to us not to do. Okay, so this is why we're trying to break it down for you. Because people like to claim, people that don't know the Bible, that haven't taken the time to study this, they like to claim that Abraham is breaking Jewish law, that he's breaking the Torah, and that he's eating non-kosher.
Yeah.
The only kosher concept in the Torah, Leviticus 11, Deuteronomy 14, are about clean meats that you can eat. Which animals are clean and which are unclean. The cooking instructions is just simply this pagan occultic practice of cooking the meat in the mother's milk.
Yeah, specifically.
All these other things we just read to you about preparation and who you can sit with that's eating dairy products or meat products, that's not in the scriptures. Yeah. In fact, sweetie, I think this is probably the whole foundation behind the famous Acts 10 vision that Peter had, where he was being chastised because he was not wanting to sit with others, quote unquote, the Gentiles, right?
Yeah.
So it's very possible that this was some of his lingering motivations, right? Because remember, like I think, I've shared this in previous episodes, but Jesus chose Peter as a disciple not because he had it all figured out yet, right? There was plenty of other people mentioned in the apostles. Excuse me. There's plenty of other people mentioned in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that Jesus did not go call to be his disciple, and it calls them righteous because they had already figured it out. Right? They had already been trained and were doing the Torah and were doing righteousness. And there was others that he was chastising for keeping these custom laws of the Jewish Talmud, being promoted by the Pharisees, yet they were not keeping Torah. And then there's people like Peter. Okay. He's a regular average Joe. He didn't have the training that Paul did, okay, as far as theological training. And he still needed to learn. He needed a master to disciple him. He needed a teacher to teach him how to actually do this stuff. And so even we see after the ascension of Jesus in Acts chapter 10, even though he's still considered a leader in the church, there apparently was some lingering indoctrination from rabbinical Judaism that he was still trying to kick, because the Father has to tell him, look, these Gentiles are not unclean. Yeah. You can eat with them. Yeah. It's okay. And by that, it's not about food. That whole vision wasn't about food. It was about people.
Well, you know what's really ironic about that Peter needs to be rebuked for that, is that if you read back in, I think it's in Exodus, it's talking about how when the Hebrews were in Egypt, the Egyptians had a custom where it was detestable to them to eat with the Hebrews. True. So here we are all this time later, and the Hebrews are, scattered in the nations, they're living in Judea and whatnot. And here they are treating the non-Hebrews with that same, it's detestable to eat with them. Yeah. So it's interesting how that stuff just always comes full circle.
Yeah, it becomes like this cultural pride.
Yeah, nobody is immune from being sucked into these, cultural ideas that...
Right. So even in modern day Israel, if you go over there, you'll find the same behavior and the same prejudice from those who consider themselves Jews, and then those who are considered Gentiles, and how they treat them and how they speak about them. Yeah. Because that mindset, which is very unloving, which is not what God describes, comes from Talmudic Judaism. And that's what they teach. That's what they're indoctrinated in since birth. And this is why they made it illegal to even talk about Jesus on the street. Yeah.
And we're not attacking individual followers of Judaism. Like, I listen to Ben Shapiro every morning. I love his podcast. I think
it's like political commentary.
Yeah,
it's not theological teachings.
No, he's as far as not going to him for any biblical knowledge. I mean, he's a smart guy, and I pray for him every day to come to knowledge of Yeshua. So this isn't an attack on individuals. We want you to really understand that we love everybody. We want everybody to come to the truth of Yeshua and keeping the commandments, and that's what we want for everybody. We just want to help point out these huge differences between what the religion of Judaism actually teaches and indoctrinates people into compared to what the Torah says. In the same way that we do it with what are taught in the mainstream churches, it's no different. We love everybody in those churches just as much as we love all the people in the synagogues. We understand.
We just encourage everybody to keep God's words in context of what God's words are and not what man's opinions are.
Yeah, and just like any other time we come across a verse that gives us an opportunity to point out a bad teaching from church that we learned, we feel like we want to do the same with Judaism, because a lot of times it's really easy for us to come out of the churches and start keeping the Sabbath and realizing these things didn't change, and then a lot of us might immediately go to Judaism to look for advice on these things. And it's not necessarily the right thought system to go looking for advice from.
Because unfortunately there are some bad teachings still in the modern American churches that claim that those who are keeping Judaism are actually following Christ, yet they just don't accept him, but they're still following Christ. They just don't realize it. And they're like our extended brethren. Yeah. It's very vague and it's very non-scriptural, to be honest, but it's also very confusing to a lot of folks who do not have the time to spend reading their Bible as others do, and they come out realizing there's a lot of hypocrisy and there's a lot of things not being taught in the church, and there's a lot of things taken out of context, and there shouldn't be 40,000 different denominations in American churches, and they realize there's problems and they want truth, and then they think, well, the Jewish people must have truth, right? They've been keeping it this whole time. They're trying to get back to the simple instruction of it all, and instead of getting good instruction in the scriptures, right, which is what our goal is for kingdom portions. Yeah. Unfortunately, these people run right into Judaism. And then that's a totally different ditch on the other side of the road. Yeah. So that's why we have a heart for this. And just like Jesus did. I think he made a great example. Jesus is a perfect example in all ways, right? Same way in this, okay? So he had Pharisees around him all the time that hated what he was saying, right? They wanted to kill him at every point. because he was rebuking their false man-made opinions and traditions. They were superseding over on top of God's instructions in the scriptures. But here's the thing, sweetie. Did he just, every time he went and spoke publicly and there were Pharisees in the crowd, did he tell them, okay, wait, before I speak, Pharisees, get out of here. You can't be around here. No. He was loving, he was gracious. If they were going to listen, he was willing to listen. He even entertained some questions from them at time to time. John chapter 3 is a famous account with Nicodemus, who was a Pharisee. It changed Nicodemus' life, right? So even though, and Joseph of Arimathea as well, he was also a Pharisee. Okay, so obviously he revealed himself in like miraculous fashion in Acts chapter 9 to Paul, to switch him from Judaistic Pharisee beliefs over to following the actual way of the Torah.
And he never rebuked the laymen, the people underneath the Pharisees who were blinded by these teachings, who were deceived by these teachings. He rebuked the teachings and the teachers.
That's right.
He didn't rebuke the people that were being deceived by the teachings. He taught them. He taught them the truth.
He taught them the truth, yeah. And so that's kind of our heart, is that we're trying to help people dissect this stuff. And so what a lot of people would just skip right over when they read Genesis 18 and they see Abram and Sarai.
She's Sarah now.
She's Sarah already. So Abraham and Sarah at this point. And they're actually, hosting a meal.
Yeah.
For these three angels.
That's another thing I wanted to point out before we move to the next chapter that is just something people glaze over, is these angels show up in physical form.
That's right.
They eat physical, real, human food.
That's right.
And what are we going to be made like when we're resurrected?
Like
we're going to be made like the angels.
We're going to get the same spiritual type of body that the angels have. And just like Jesus exemplified, eating food.
Right. So this concept that the resurrection is just some spiritual thing, the kingdom is a spiritual thing that's in our hearts right now.
You mean that it's not tangible and real?
Exactly. Yeah. It's not, a spiritual body is not...
Or at least, excuse me, let me back up. You mean that people claim it's not tangible and real?
Yes, people think of spiritual and they think like Casper the Friendly Ghost. They think something wispy and smoky and it doesn't have a physical body. But these angels, we see angels show up constantly.
That's right.
As men. And they eat and they do all these... apparently they could procreate with women on somehow. Mm-hmm. So... I just want to point out to people, when we're made like the angels, that doesn't mean we're going to just, be, spirits floating around like we're taught to.
We're going to have real bodies. It's just made of a different substance.
Yeah.
Adam was made of soil, of the dirt, and the Father breathed the Spirit into him. He became a living soul. Spiritual beings, like angels, are made of spirit and water, as Jesus explains to us in John chapter 3. And this is why we have to be born again of spirit and water to enter the kingdom of heaven, which is the resurrection event, which is why in Isaiah 26:19 it says the earth gives birth to departed spirits, and this is the moment of the first resurrection. So it's a different nature.
Yeah.
Paul explains this in great depth in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 35 through 49, I believe, where he talks about there's things that come from the earth, they're called earthy. There's things that are made from the spirit, they're called spiritual beings. And at the resurrection, we are done with our earthy body and we're given this spiritual body. Yeah. From a scientific standpoint, it's a different type of physics. Okay, so if we're made of soil, this would be more like being made to look the same, except we're made of water.
Yeah.
Now we're already 78% water or something like that anyway. But as far as full-on physics and how it works, and this is why to me
our actual anatomy.
The actual anatomy is different. But this could be, sweetie, why water is so fascinating to scientists.
Yeah. Well, and why it's such actually a mysterious substance. Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of really cool stuff about it. It holds memory.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, water is an incredible substance, and if you ever have a chance to just like type in water documentary on YouTube, definitely look into that, because there's a lot of really cool stuff about water. Yeah,
so that's the hope that we have, what we call our blessed hope, according to Paul, that we have this anticipated new created body for us at the resurrection. So that's why that created body can still eat, can still drink. Yeah. It's still just like ours. It's just made of a different physics, and it's designed to last forever. And so this whole concept here is we have earthy Abraham and Sarah and all their peoples hosting an earthy meal for angelic spiritual beings. So just like when Jesus is resurrected, remember I think it's in John 19, he shows up into the locked room with the other disciples and he's like, I'm hungry. Has anybody got some fish?
Yeah. That's one of the first things he wants to do is eat with them.
He's like, I've been dead for 3 days. Can I get some food?
Guys ready for some supper?
You guys got some chips over there, some gefilte fish
that
and some
last
chips?
supper only lasted him so long.
To me, that's like the most real you can get.
Yeah.
Like, he's alive and he wants some food. So it's like, let's get him some food. I'm sure he's hungry. I think that's wild. So yes, that's what we see happen in Genesis 18. And is anything else in there that you thought you might want to...
We've probably spent enough time on this chapter.
We probably have.
Because I could point out more, but I think we should move on.
So we'll go to Genesis 19, guys. Verse 1 says, Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. He said, Now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way. And they said, however, No, but we shall spend the night in the square. Yet he urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them, and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. And they called to Lot and said to him, Where are the men who came to you last night? Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may have relations with them. But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him. And it said, Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now behold, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with man. Please let me bring them out to you, and do to them whatever you like. Only do nothing to these men, inasmuch as they have come under the shelter of my roof. But they said, Stand aside. Furthermore, they said, This one came in as an alien, and already he is acting like a judge. Now we will treat you worse than them. So they pressed hard against Lot, and came near to break the door. But the men reached out their hands, and brought Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. They struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves trying to find the doorway. Then the 2 men said to Lot, Whom else have you here? A son-in-law, and your sons, and your daughters, and whomever you have in this city, bring him out of this place. For we are about to destroy this place, because their outcry has become so great before the Lord, that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, and said, Up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But he appeared to his sons-in-laws to be jesting. And when morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he hesitated. So the men seized his hand and the hand of his wife and the hands of his 2 daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him, and they brought him out and put him outside the city. When they had brought them outside, one said, Escape for your life. Do not look back behind you, and do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away. But Lot said to them, Oh no, my lords. Now behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your loving kindness, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, for the disaster will overtake me. I will die. Now behold, if this town is near enough to flee to, and it is small, please let me escape there. Is it not small, that my life may be saved? He said to them, Behold, I grant you this request also, he said to them, Behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore the name of the town was called Zoar. The sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. And then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. He overthrew those cities and all this valley, all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But his wife, from behind him, looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Now Abraham rose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he saw, behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. Thus it came about, when God destroyed the cities of the valley, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow. When he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived, Lot went up from Zoar and stayed in the mountains with his 2 daughters with him, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar, and he stayed in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. Then the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine. Let us lie with him, that we may preserve our family through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with their father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. On the following day the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let me make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve our family through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son, and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. As for the younger, she also bore a son, and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the sons of Ammon to this day. All right. Okay, so this is a tough chapter.
That's a rough chapter.
This is a tough chapter. Okay, so Lot, I think the first thing that pops in my head is, Lot's wife, famous story of Lot's wife looking back, turns to a pillar of salt. I don't know how the physics of that works, but I know if you're raining fire and brimstone is just salt, by the way.
Yeah.
People don't realize that sometimes. And salt burns. So hence fire and brimstone raining down. But basically it seems like she didn't want to go, right?
It seems like his whole family it's like he was unequally yoked with everybody.
Yeah.
Because he seemed to struggle with his own being afraid to leave. Right. And then it sounds like his wife didn't want to go. Well, sounds like the sons-in-law just laughed at him and thought he was joking.
Right. And the wife turns back. She gets judged for that.
Yeah.
Or she just basically gets in the disaster area of the judgment. They go to Zoar. The entire town, by the way, is saved because of this decision. It was supposed to be destroyed. But
what did God say to Abraham when they were having that back and forth?
That's right.
That he would spare them on account of
less than 5 people, 10 people?
It sounds like Lot was the only one in all of Sodom because he's the only one they went to take out before he destroyed the cities.
But as an addendum to that agreement made with the angels, now this is where we run into this concept called agency, okay? Where the angels are sent to speak in lieu of the Father, okay? They're there to speak the message of the Father. We see this all throughout the Bible as a whole. This is something I'll put it up here on the screen. It's a video I've made from Morning Cup of Context called No One's Heard the Father. And I go all throughout the scriptures and show you what agency is. So in this moment, agency is being used by the angels. These 3 angels have been sent. I know a lot of people like to claim that this was a pre-incarnate Yeshua, but guys, these are just angels. They always speak because the Father's given them a message. They walk in the authority of the Father in that moment to do this mission. And the people who are wise will respect them as if they're God. Now, they're not worshiping them as God, but they will respect them as if they're God because they bring the message of God with them.
Yeah, that's why when you see them having these conversations with the angels, it goes back and forth from it saying the angel of the Lord said, or the Lord said, or they will address these angels as if they're the Lord.
Right. And they'll say, my Lord, what about this? Or, what, may I venture to speak one more time with the Lord?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they're using the angels as a conduit. And this is why it's not just having a pre-recorded message and showing up and pressing play, right? This is an actual emissary concept, all right? Just like today, we have modern versions of this called Secretary of State, right? Where supposedly that person's been trusted by the president in some regard to represent the president with foreign dignitaries and foreign secretaries of state for diplomatic relations, carrying one message to another, okay? This is all we're seeing with angels. It's the same thing.
We see it in how many movies about ancient, civilizations, and the emissary of the king is sent somewhere, and any harm done to that emissary is seen legally as no different from harming the king himself.
That's right, yeah. Famous movie came out 13 years ago, the movie 300.
Yeah, that's exactly the one I was thinking of.
So the emissary of King Xerxes shows up with a bunch of skulls in his hand trying to intimidate King Leonidas of the Greeks. And then King Leonidas is like, how dare you threaten me and disrespect my queen.
Greek, he's Spartan, babe.
So, yeah. All right. So he kicks him into the well and it starts the war, right? So because he treated this guy with disrespect and he killed the emissary, therefore to Xerxes, it was like he was a death threat to Xerxes as well. So that started the war. All right. Same thing here with angels. Every time we see them in Scripture, they're here to say the message of the Father so the people can get it. And as we saw, they can have full-on conversations. They can interact. They can make decisions. They've probably already been told, this is how much you can augment the initial message, and this is how far you cannot go, right? So in this example, 5 cities of the plain were supposed to be destroyed, but because of Lot and the way he was behaving and how much they were resisting, this little city of Zoar actually escaped judgment. Now, I doubt because of the whole we see later that Abraham moves after this because of what happened. He goes back up towards Bethel. But I would imagine that the inhabitants of Zoar might have picked up shop as well. I mean, if you've just got all this other place destroyed, you know what I mean?
Yeah, possibly.
Because it probably messed with the water system, the land.
Hopefully they repented.
I don't see any indication of that. But the point is, for a very brief moment, he tries to stay there for refuge, but then he even shows his lack of faith. This is what I'm trying to get to. Sorry, it's taking a minute. Once he's in Zoar, then he says, I'm afraid to stay here too, right? Because he knew those men were wicked, and he couldn't hang out too long, right? So then that's when they go to the cave and we read about these other shenanigans.
That's another thing that makes me think about the unequal yoking going on in his family and the influence that living in that city must have had on his family, because look at how warped and messed up the thought process of the daughters is once they get into that cave.
Yeah, they're sitting there thinking, well, we've got to keep our family going, and our dad's the one to do it. That's not right. These girls were previously engaged, right? Yeah. We read that earlier in the story. They're the future sons-in-laws rejected the offer to leave town.
I guess we're not told what happened to the sons-in-laws on this.
They're dead. They're dead.
So they didn't even come with them.
No, they're dead. And they're burned in the fire in the judgment. So the point is, now these girls are on the market again, okay? But instead of thinking, oh, well, maybe there's some dudes in Zoar, that town we just left, that we just had refuge in, no, they're like, oh, there's no other men for us on the earth. We're going to have to carry on our family line with our father. So yes, I'm 100% agreeing with you. Clearly, Sodom and Gomorrah and the atmosphere, the spiritual atmosphere going on in those cities was so twisted and so perverted and warped. We see that playing out in the reasoning capacity of Lot's two daughters. And so it's sad, for one, because we later see how this plays out in the book of Deuteronomy with the Ammonites and the Moabites. Because they're basically, this was Deuteronomy 23:3. It's the law about getting into the actual temple tabernacle to do sacrifice and stuff, to get real close. Not the outer court, but the inner camp, the inner place where they would come up and had to wait, 10 generations before an Ammonite or a Moabite could come that close.
And the commandment is specifically children of incestuous relationships. But it immediately goes into talking about how long the Ammonites and the Moabites cannot be in the assembly of the Lord when it comes to going to the actual door of the tent of meeting.
That's right. We actually covered that on Kingdom Portion several, a month ago maybe.
Yeah,
when we were reading the Deuteronomy 23 part. But that's what we're reading right here, sweetie. Is Genesis 19. We're reading an incestuous relationship between Lot and his two daughters, and the offspring that came about were these other clans we see all throughout the Old Testament, the Ammonites and the Moabites. And because of that, there was a specific timeline requirement as far as if they wanted to be a part of Israel, they had to wait a certain amount of generations before they could even get close, to the temple. So they could still do the commandments, they could still come in and they could become a part of Israel and still do the terms of the covenant. But as far as literally going up close to the presence of God, they had to wait a certain amount of time because they were genetically unclean for a long time.
Yeah, that gene pool needed to be cleared out.
Yeah. So the reason why we bring that up is because a lot of people, in modern times, there's children of incestuous relationships. And be very clear, I want to be very clear, we just like we did in that previous video where we discussed Deuteronomy 23, the specific command was for the tabernacle.
Yeah.
So this was in our earthly bodies, in our fleshly bodies now, and the tabernacle. This wasn't about salvation. Mm-hmm. You can still come to faith and belief in Jesus Christ if you're a child of incestuous relationship. There is still hope. He does not exclude you from his presence. This was a specific requirement, a specific command just for the earthly tabernacle that's no longer here right now. And at the resurrection, you're given a new body anyway, and you're born of God. You're totally out of this earthly consequence in any way from this earthly body. And you're given an incorruptible body that's made perfect, and you can go stand right next to Yeshua and hug him. Okay? So this, I don't want anyone to be misunderstood. So that's, just want to drive that home if possible. So what else is in this chapter?
I think that's probably good for now.
Yeah, and I think, chapter 20 is next. Do you want to read that one?
Yeah, I can read that.
Okay.
Oops, all right.
Yeah, it's tough to even read Genesis 19 because of all the bad decisions being made.
And then all the questions that it bring up as far as why this, why that, how was Lot living? He's called righteous. There's just a whole lot there that we're not going to really know until we get to the kingdom when we can ask about all this, because there's some stuff in here that's just not clearly stated.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if, back in, Genesis 13, when Abraham and Lot split, and then Lot looked towards the valley and saw Sodom and Gomorrah and saw that it was lush and beautiful, and he wanted to go live there. It makes you wonder if this was a matter of time that this was happening. Over time, Sodom and Gomorrah got really bad. I don't know how much. I haven't really done the math to see how much time it was, but clearly the angels were willing to save him for Abraham's sake. So that just shows you how faithful Abraham was. That they were all that shenanigans and all that extra effort the father put in just to save someone that he knew Abraham cared about. Much of that family apparently did not even share the sentiment, value, or theological beliefs of Abraham. See what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's just, it's such a beautiful story and frustrating at the same time.
All right.
Genesis chapter 20.
Moving on. All right. Now Abraham journeyed from there toward the land of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. Then he sojourned in Gerar. Abraham said to Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." So here we go again. So Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream of the night and said to him, "Behold, you are a dead man because of the woman you have taken, for she is married." Now Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, "Lord, will you slay a nation even though blameless? Did he not himself say to me, 'She is my sister,' and she herself said, 'He is my brother'? In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands I have done this." Then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know that in the integrity of your heart you have done this, and I also kept you from sinning against me. Therefore I did not let you touch her. Now therefore restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours." So Abimelech arose early in the morning and called all his servants and told all these things in their hearing, and the men were greatly frightened. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us, and how have I sinned against you, that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done." And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What have you encountered that you have done this thing?" Abraham said, "Because I thought, surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she actually is my sister, the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came about when God caused me to wander from my father's house that I said to her, 'This is the kindness which you will show me. Everywhere we go, say of me, He is my brother.'" Abimelech then took sheep and oxen and male and female servants and gave them to Abraham and restored his wife Sarah to him. Abimelech said, "Behold, my land is before you, settle wherever you please." To Sarah he said, "Behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, it is your vindication before all who are with you, and before all men you are cleared." Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maids so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed fast all the wombs of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife.
Wow. It's like a repeat of Genesis 12 with Pharaoh.
Yeah, and just a whole nother situation of, gosh, well, how long were they there?
Right.
How long were they there? If they were long enough for Sarah to be with Abimelech long enough that the wombs in the whole household were closed. I mean, it has to be a little while before you notice that women aren't bearing children.
I don't know. I think the book of Jasher talks about it a little bit, but that would be a fun little study on its own. Ultimately, though, some of the confusion sometimes arises from Genesis chapter 12 when he tells Pharaoh back, he does the same thing back with Pharaoh a few chapters earlier. And he takes Pharaoh, and the same event happens. Pharaoh figures out, oh my gosh, she's actually married, and he gives her back, kicks Abraham out of Egypt. But ultimately, this guy had the fear of the Lord to a degree where he ends up making a covenant later with Abraham.
Yeah.
This particular guy, this particular Abimelech. By the way, the word Abimelech, even though it's the same name with Genesis 12 and Genesis 20, these are different. It's a title for a king. And, the word Melech is a word for king in Hebrew. So best I can think is it's just a moniker that's given because this guy is over, what was it, Gerar?
Yeah.
Which is near Shechem, which is in north of Jerusalem, about, 2 hours. But it's the other Abimelech was the Pharaoh of Egypt. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's just a title. But the point is, this time he actually expounds, and he's like, actually, she is my sister, technically, but she's also my wife. So that's
a whole nother thing. That's like, oh my gosh. It's just,
so
these are rough chapters. He
definitely deceived both the Pharaoh and this king of Gerar. But he technically wasn't lying. He was running in that gray area, and it caused problems.
Yeah.
All right. And so this is where I would not recommend doing that. So
what's really interesting to me though here is that this Abimelech, he clearly knew the Lord. Like he knew who that entity was that was speaking to him in a dream.
Yeah.
He knew what sin was because he's like, you caused me to commit this great sin. He knew how important it was to have integrity in his heart.
That's right.
I didn't, in my heart, I was going off of what I thought was the truth, and what he thought was the truth would not have been sin. So it's interesting here. Then we also see, Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you look at the timeline, it makes me wonder where this guy came from.
Yeah.
And if he had any interaction with Eber or Shem.
Yeah,
or any of
if
these
he's
guys.
up in that area, he might... Clearly, the people around the children of Israel and their forefathers knew who the God was that they were serving. They knew this name. They knew they served, because they have all their own gods that they were serving. So, clearly, they knew. They just didn't fear him, I guess. But it does seem like this one in particular did have fear of him and didn't want to tick him off.
This is what Abraham said at the beginning. He's like, I feared that there was no fear of God here.
Yeah.
I was afraid there was no fear of God here and you would just kill me. And then the guy's like, well, actually, we do have the fear of God here.
Yeah.
And he starts speaking churchanese, basically.
Yeah.
Right? He starts speaking terms that Abraham could understand relevant to honoring God and righteousness. So, very interesting story. Very interesting.
Yeah, another thing to note before we move on to the next chapter is that Abraham is clearly called a prophet.
That's right.
By the Father. And he's also interceding for Abimelech here. So what's interesting about that is that that's the job of a priest.
That's right.
A priest intercedes between man and God.
Right.
And
Transgression and rectifying it for atonement with God.
And it's also interesting that even though Abimelech didn't intentionally sin here, he still needed to have Abraham intercede for him. He still needed to have reconciliation made.
That is Leviticus 4, unintentional sins are taken care of by a priest.
Yeah.
It's part of God's instructions for living. It's part of what we call his Torah.
It shows how much the heart matters, because the father says to Abimelech, I know you had integrity in your heart. I know your heart. I know you weren't intending to sin against me.
Right. He clearly knew Abraham kind of deceived him a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? So, but even so, this also sheds light on the fact that even the priests were men who make mistakes.
Right.
This is what Hebrews 7 tries to explain to us, Hebrews 9 actually, where it tries to talk about how that priesthood was not perfect and there was fault found within that priesthood. Therefore, they could not be perfectly set apart as a high priest to make eternal atonement for us. This is what Yeshua, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, accomplished for us, was that he perfectly was set apart and therefore was able to become our eternal high priest in the order of Melchizedek to make eternal atonement for us, because that's the rules of the game. That was the part of the Father's instructions. So this is just another great example of a prophet and priest who's still mortal, still fallible, still makes mistakes, but God still honors him keeping his instructions when he prayed for atonement for healing for Gerar, for the king of Gerar and his household, so these women could bear children again. So just there's a lot of good lessons in this one. Ultimately, about just the gray areas that show you that there's the right and wrong in many different situations. You just want to continue to try to strive towards the right way. All right, so let's jump into chapter 21 real quick. Genesis 21. This says, verse 1, Then the Lord took note of Sarah, as he said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son, who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, called him Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she said, Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. The child grew and was weaned. Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. Now Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, mocking. Therefore she said to Abraham, Drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because of his son. But God said to Abraham, Do not be distressed because of the lad and your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her, for through Isaac your descendants shall be named. And the son of the maid I will make a nation also, because he is your descendant. So Abraham rose early in the morning, and took bread and a skin of water, and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, and gave her the boy, and sent her away. And she departed, and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was used up, she left the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him, about a bowshot away, for she said, Do not let me see the boy die. And she sat opposite him, and lifted up her voice, and wept. God heard the lad crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, and said to her, What is the matter with you, Hagar? Do not fear, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water, and gave the lad a drink. God was with the lad, and he grew, and he lived in the wilderness and became an archer. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Now it came about at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, spoke to Abraham, saying, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me here, by God, that you will not deal falsely with me or with my offspring or with my posterity, but according to the kindness that I have shown you, you shall show to me and to the land in which you have sojourned. Abraham said, I swear it. But Abraham complained to Abimelech because of the well of water which the servants of Abimelech had seized. And Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing, but you did not tell me, nor did I hear of it until today. Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. Then Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. Abimelech said to Abraham, What do these 7 ewe lambs mean, which you have set by themselves? And he said, You shall take these 7 ewe lambs from my hand, so that it may be a witness to me that I dug this well. Therefore he called that place Beersheba, because there the two of them took an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba, and Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, arose and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the land of the Philistines for many days. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
He calls him the everlasting God there because the name of Yahweh is not even revealed to Exodus 3, Exodus chapter 4. So that's just something that's sometimes we miss, Yeah. Even in the book of Enoch, he's just called the Lord of Spirits most of the time. But that's why he says to in the burning bush moment, he says to Moses, to your forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they just knew me as the Almighty, but to you, I'm telling you my name, the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So it's very interesting. But in this particular chapter, we've got basically, we're not going to focus too much on this particular chapter, right? The only thing I wanted to point out was the distress that Abraham felt when Sarah made this request.
Yeah.
When she was like, send Hagar and Ishmael away. And it says that Abram was greatly distressed for the boy because of Sarah's request. It's not talking about Isaac. If you read closely, it's talking about Ishmael. Abraham loved Ishmael.
That in Abraham and Sarah's mind, until Isaac came along, Ishmael was their firstborn son. And
at this point, I think we may read this later in Jubilees, but he's like 13 years old when this happens, So he's had 13 years to get acquainted and attached to Ishmael, and he loves him. He's his son. So it's something where he did have to pray, and then he needed that extra confirmation for the father to tell him, no, listen to Sarah in this moment and send her away. She'll be all right. I'll take care of her, and he does. He takes care of Ishmael and Hagar.
Yeah.
So it's nice, but
and we read about that later on, that Ishmael had 12 sons and
became 12 great princes.
They were princes, and
they became
the 12
a great
tribes of Ishmael are a thing.
Yeah, I wonder who they became in history.
I tried to research that once, and there's really no information on it. We're all just told that the Muslims come from Ishmael. That's just what we're told.
Yeah.
But there's really no historical proof for that. There's no genealogies to really prove that. So we don't really know.
But what we do know from Genesis, Jubilees, and Jasher is that Ishmael was considered righteous.
Yeah.
And that would just make sense because he's raised by Abraham.
Yeah.
This is what we read at the very beginning, right? In chapter 18, that the angels, when they were speaking to Moses, or excuse, speaking to Abraham, they knew that he would raise children that would follow the ways of the Lord, And so that's, if nothing else, consolation for Ishmael and his descendants.
And it also seems like Ishmael and Isaac, they didn't have the type of dynamic that Jacob and Esau had, where they hated each other.
Right.
Because Ishmael comes back when Abraham dies, and they bury him together. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't. Fortunately, it doesn't seem like there's any strife between the two of them, even despite all of this strife going on, between the adults when they were children. So
that's right. So similarly, and a lot of people will think, well, because Ishmael wasn't the child of promise, therefore he's not in covenant. And I've heard this argument, and it's very poorly exegeted from the word. Okay, so let's just take it to something hopefully everyone could easily relate to, and that's the 12 sons of Israel. Okay, the 12 sons of Jacob. Only through supposedly Judah and Levi do we get the lineage that leads to Yeshua, to Jesus, right? To Yeshua of Nazareth. That means there's 10 other people that were part of the covenant, part of the tribe, from whom the seed would come about through Jacob, right? The promise to Jacob.
Yeah.
Through your seed will come about. Does that mean the other 10 guys, like Naphtali and Dan and Asher, Benjamin, like they weren't in covenant? Of course not.
Right.
Of course not, guys. It was just talking about the lineage that the Messiah would come through, from the posterity that would happen to bless all nations through the work that Messiah does. But anyone who could be in the covenant through faith and belief, right?
Yeah.
Through faith and action and belief of obedience to God's terms of the covenant. So I just want to, I know it sounds, I don't know. I've just heard that argument, so I just wanted to bring that up, make sure people weren't confused on that. All right. Anything else in that one?
No, I think we can move on to 22.
Okay. So this will be chapter 22, guys. Genesis 22.
All right. Excuse me. Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. He said, Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering, on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, and saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering, and arose, and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day Abraham raised his eyes, and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship, and return to you. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac spoke to Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the 2 of them walked on together. Then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar there, and arranged the wood, and bound his son Isaac, and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord it will be provided. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven, and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing, and have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. Now it came about after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz his firstborn, and Buz his brother, and Kemuel the father of Aram, and Chesed, and Hazo, and Pildash, and Jidlap, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. His concubine, whose name was Reumah, also bore Teba and Gaham and Tahash and Maacah. The end.
It's more names, more fun names to work through. So, crazy story, beautiful story at the same time. Before we get into the meat of the actual chapter, there's a couple unique statistics that are inside this chapter that a lot of people aren't aware of. It's the first time the word love is used in Genesis.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's the first time the word worship is used in Genesis. In the same chapter, the first appearances of 2 concepts. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. Guys, when he says we're going to go over there and worship, the next verse is them going over into the wooded area and doing the burnt offering.
That's right.
When we try to point out this, that the system of sacrifices is not a burden and it's not a punishment and it's not just to remind people of their sins and to remind them not to sin next time. It's literally worship. It's the way that the Father has prescribed that he be worshipped.
That's right. And, as we've discussed in previous episodes, it's simply making a meal.
Yeah.
So the altar sacrifice was him
setting up his cooking surface.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And he brought the animals for the sacrifice. Yes, there were specific instructions on the ingredients and the cooking preparations, but ultimately they ate of the meal that they cooked. We see this in Leviticus 7 and chapter 6 as well. We see this in Deuteronomy 12 and 14. We see this in so many places. Only specific sacrifices, there's I think only 2 or 3 that had to do with the Holy of Holies and things like that. Those animals were not eaten, but all the other ones, all these sacrificial meals that we're seeing Abraham do, like he's literally just making a meal before the Lord, and that's what he's calling worship. So if I could relate this away from all these terms that people think are like strict religious terms, guys, this is as if your father called you and said, hey, would you like to come to my house and make a meal? You bring the food, I've got the grill, we'll cook out in the backyard and have a good time. We'll fellowship, we'll have a good time, and we'll reestablish relationship and solidify bonds between you two. That's all this concept of worship really is in the Old Testament. Is they're making meals and eating. So as a result of this was a couple things we need to point out here, because people are probably going, but wait, you sacrificed Isaac. You trying to say he's going to eat him? No. Yeah. God abhors human sacrifice. God abhors cannibalism, according to his, Deuteronomy 13 and other places where he says you will not sacrifice your children to Molech or to Baal. And this was an actual test that Abraham passed, which is why he was stopped and he didn't go through it. And he even says so in the chapter, right? He says, because you have not withheld your only son. And by the way, I don't know if this has any significance, but it says 3 times in this chapter that he calls Isaac your only son. Yeah. What about Ishmael?
Exactly.
So, is it truly his only son? Yes, it's his only son from Sarah. It's his only son of promise. That the whole point of him saying, I've called you out of the Chaldees, I'll establish a nation with you. By you, all the families of the world will be blessed, and I will give you and your descendants an inheritance forever in this land, forever. All this huge moments leading up to this point in Abraham's life. Because this supposedly was like well into Isaac's life. Yeah. He was like 29 or something like this. Yeah. So he was not a young kid. And even the book of Jasher claims that he knew what was kind of up, and he willingly went, and his mother pleaded with him not to go, but he willingly went. So the point is, there's a lot of more symbolism relating this back to the father and son and Yeshua's sacrifice for us. So it's very, very similar, which is why he keeps calling Isaac, you did not withhold your only son.
Whom you love.
That's right. So I think it's fascinating because we see that same parallel with the Messiah. Yeah. And there's all this parallel with Messiah here.
The Father loves the Son.
The Father loves the Son, and the Son was willing to lay down his life. Yeah. And now, of course, we want to make the reason why we're taking a moment with this to explain this. The Father does not instruct human sacrifice. In all of the Old Testament, he abhorred it. That was what the pagan nations did. Yeah. They went and made meals before their God, and much of that was involved in drinking the blood of strangled animals or even eating the flesh of other humans. And other things went on at this feasts that we don't want to talk about. So the point is, like, that was the opposite. That was the reverse. That was the bad stuff that went down. And some of that included cannibalism. But with the Father, he never instructed that. He only said, here's, bring a lamb or bring a heifer or bring, a chicken or whatever. So that's where he's just saying, bring some food for the cookout, Yeah. Now, Yeshua went to the cross willingly. The cross was not an altar of unhewn stone. Yeshua did not die literally at the hand of a priest. Okay? He was not, none of the requirements for worship when it came to them preparing a meal on an altar sacrifice in the Old Testament applies to what Yeshua did, being betrayed by his people and murdered by the Romans on a cross as a public spectacle. Yeah. Okay? His body was not cut up and eaten and burned and cooked. He was, you know what I'm saying? None of that is the same. That's why symbolically he's called the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. Symbolically, he gave his life in sacrifice. He laid down his life for his brothers, as 1 John 3 talks about. This is not saying he was a literal human sacrifice. Right. And this is a very important point of distinction because unfortunately, there's a lot of people running around claiming that Jesus nullifies the Old Testament because I'm like, no, I don't know if they understand what the Old Testament really instructs, nor what Jesus did.
And not just that, but guys, the anti-missionaries, the people who are going around and convincing people to reject Yeshua and join Judaism or whatever weird version they've got of their own now, because they don't believe in keeping the Talmud.
Right.
They also use that as one of their key arguments against Yeshua being the Messiah, is their human sacrifice is not allowed in the Torah. And they are correct in that particular point, but they're wrong in the fact that
they think
Yeshua was that, because it's taught in the churches and even outside of the churches. Even once we leave church, I still see it all over in the Messianic community, teaching he was a literal sacrifice. That is just ammo for the anti-missionaries, guys. And we got to really understand what it means when we say that.
So if you're thinking that, wait a minute, I thought Jesus laid down his life, he did. It's Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7 through 10. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through suffering. He willingly, and we're going to read about this later in one of our pairings about Jesus' decision, where he's like, look, not my will be done but yours, but if there is another way, I'd like to let this cup pass from me, but not my will but yours be done, because he knew that he had to lay down his life. He exemplified he had the authority to not be taken to the cross.
Yeah. If
he wanted to, from the power that exuded from him, and he didn't have to be taken, but he allowed himself to. It wasn't like an animal that against its understanding and will is taken to an altar and made to be a meal. So, right? So none of the Old Testament's instructions for worship through altar sacrifice is synonymous with Yeshua. None of it's synonymous. So I just want to make sure I'm using the right words and stressing that enough so that people understand the metaphoric descriptions placed upon the sacrifice of Jesus of Nazareth in comparison to the law. So this is why it's so important, and why one of the reasons why we're doing these kingdom portions, to try to help people understand the first part of the book, so that when they read the end of the book and all the metaphoric comparisons the apostles are making about Jesus in comparison to the first part of the book, they understand what's being said and what's being talked about. Yeah. That's really important. So what's really interesting to me is where this is taking place. So guys, this is taking place in Mount Moriah, which is apparently in this area, which is actually called Mount Zion. Mm-hmm. So this is actually happening in the vicinity of Jerusalem, and the hill of Golgotha, where Yeshua was sacrificed. That's fascinating to me. Yeah. It's truly fascinating. Some people even try to connect it as the same hill, but that depends on the archaeological evidence from how the Romans reshaped everything and put the fortress of Antonio up there and all that stuff. And so, that goes into kind of some speculation on where things were placed in the past, because the Romans redid everything. So it was just so anyway, the point is he's in the same area. He's in the same city. So basically, in the vicinity of Jerusalem, this is what's going down. That's why it says at the beginning, I want you guys to go on a 3-day journey, and then I want you to go to the hill that I'm going to point out. God's telling them, just go to that hill I'm going to point out over there. So it's very possible it could have been the same hill for symbolic reasons. I just think it's fascinating to me that, and again, it's because Jesus was the only Son of God. So let's get to our portions real quick, guys.
Our pairings.
Excuse me, our pairings. Yeah.
Every week you call it the portions.
I might do it next week too. Let's get to our pairings for this portions. Chapter 13 in Isaiah. Okay, here in Isaiah chapter 13, verse 17, it says, "Behold, I'm going to stir up the Medes against them, who will not value silver or take pleasure in gold. And their bows will mow down the young men. They will not even have compassion on the fruit of the womb, nor will I pity children. And Babylon, the beauty of kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It will never be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation, nor will the Arab pitch his tent there, nor will shepherds make their flocks lie down there, but desert creatures will lie down there, and their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches will also live there, and shaggy goats will frolic there. Hyenas will howl in their fortified towers, jackals in their luxurious places. Her fateful time also will soon come, and her days will not be prolonged." Okay, so this is just a quick judgment on that's about to happen to Babylon back in the day. Mm-hmm. And that eventually happened. And what he's trying to say is no one's going to live there, and it's going to be very similar to when he overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. So just like today, there's a sea where those cities used to be, right? The Dead Sea now, or the Jordan now flows in to create the Dead Sea, and the entire bottom of the Dead Sea is just salt.
Yeah. Come on.
Yeah, so this is
everybody's searching for Sodom and Gomorrah all these decades, and it's I think logical deduction could help you out there a little.
So you have a sea that's so much full of salt that people can float in it unnaturally. There's no fish there, right? The fish life can live there.
Living in it, I think.
They've actually had to get specialized submarines to actually dive to the bottom, and at the bottom there's just more salt.
Yeah. And didn't we watch something where some people were trying to go down there and the government stopped them?
Yeah, they were trying to find possible structures or houses at the bottom of the sea, and they were searching different little areas, and without warning, the Israeli government decided to do demolitions testing.
Yeah.
Which is highly suspect. I can't remember the name of that documentary, but it was pretty suspicious. It's pretty bad.
Yeah, they had permission to be there, and then suddenly, like a day after they started, the Israeli government rescinded that permission and then started blowing things up in the water. In the middle of the Dead Sea. Yeah. And then they were suspicious. And then they were like afterwards like, "Oh yeah, you can look again." Yeah.
A few days later, they were allowed to go dive again. It's just so and why would that? Why wouldn't the Israeli government want remains of Sodom and Gomorrah to be found?
I would only think they wouldn't want that if they weren't actually Bible believers.
Because the Israeli government is Zionists, and they do not follow the instructions here in this book. They have their own religion according to the Talmud.
And Sean did a presentation on Parable of the Vineyard where he explains what Zionism is. So please don't freak out on us.
Yeah.
Because we have been programmed to just blindly accept the state of Israel as like fulfillment of prophecy, we automatically relate this term Zionism to the Zion of the scriptures, and they're not the same thing at all. Zionism is creating a counterfeit Zion. It's man trying to bring in the kingdom of God rather than letting Yeshua do it.
It's a political and geographical agenda that is fueled by rabbinical Judaism. And it is not what the Father promises through his word to establish Zion as the house of God, the eternal hill of God, where the Messiah rules from the throne of glory. Okay?
Yeah.
Very different description, very different outcome. So it's an imposter agenda, basically. So the point is, and I think that that video on the Parable of the Vineyard is called what's it called?
I thought it had Zionism in the title because it got Zionism? Flagged and taken down immediately.
That's right. Yeah, during the show it was flagged and taken down. It's called Zionism versus the Garden of Life, I believe is what it's called. Okay. Zionism versus the Garden of Life. So
Part 1 and 2.
Part 1 and 2, yeah, because we got interrupted midway through. But it's part of the Road to Rescue series that I do with the co-host Ken. We do this on Sunday nights. So this next pairing, guys, in the New Testament, also called the Brit Hadasha, and this we're going to look into 2 Peter chapter 2.
Excuse me.
And 2 Peter chapter 2 verses 1 through 10.
But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will also be false teachers among you, who will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing swift destruction upon themselves. Many will follow their sensuality, and because of them the way of truth will be maligned. And in their greed they will exploit you with false words. Their judgment from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell, and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, and if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction, by reducing them to ashes, having made them an example to those who would live ungodly lives thereafter, and if he rescued righteous Lot, oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men, for by what he saw and heard, that righteous man, while living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation, and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the flesh and its corrupt desires, and despise authority.
So, just, wow, there it is.
Yeah.
The men of Sodom and Gomorrah are being referenced with apostasy, with the destruction that's due to them because of their out and out wickedness and licentiousness. So, and
being an example for people all this time hereafter. They're supposed to be an example of that judgment.
That's right. So that particular, like we said in the beginning, these portions that we're reading are many chapters, lots of content to address. So when we do our pairings, we have to choose basically one or two main core themes to address. So the Isaiah 13 and 2 Peter 2 passages was addressing Sodom and Gomorrah from Genesis 19. Now we're going to just focus more on Genesis 22, and some of these pairings we're going to be reading now are related to the story of Abraham and Isaac on Mount Zion or Mount Moriah area in Genesis 22. Okay, guys? So this is Matthew 26, 36 through 46, and this is actually the Garden of Gethsemane moment. So here in Matthew 26, and verse 36 says, Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, Sit here while I go over there and pray. And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and distressed. Then he said to them, My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me. He went a little beyond them, and fell on his face and prayed, saying, My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and said to Peter, So, you men could not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Keep watching and pray, that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away again a second time and prayed, saying, My Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it... My Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it, your will be done. Again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. And he left them again, and went away and prayed a third time, saying the same thing once more. So then he came to the disciples and said to them, Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us go. Let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand. Okay, I think it's interesting. The second time he comes back, he doesn't wake him up. He just lets him sleep. And then he gets back a third time. He's like, You guys are still asleep. He's like, I've been back twice again since I woke you up the first time. So, because it was in the middle of the night, apparently. Or even they just had the big Passover meal.
Yeah.
So they had big full bellies. And now they got to go out in the dark and sit and pray, which I'm guessing they would close their eyes while they did it. And they just start falling asleep. This is professional prayers right here. So I think it's, here he's like the stark contrast between Yeshua being in deep emotional agony, right? Other passages, parallel gospels say like he prayed to where his sweat was as drops of blood. He's in deep anguish and distress. And these other guys, they're not really getting it. They're not really aware of what's happening in this moment. And they just got a full belly and it's late at night.
They were diet woke.
Yeah. And they're just, they're like, yeah, we'll pray with you, man. And then they're like, they're falling asleep. And then he's like, what are you guys doing? The guy being betrayed, right? Like it's going down now. What the law of the prophets talked about, this is happening now. And, and they're just like, what's going on? So if Peter was asleep, because, it makes me want, he says he took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee with him, but that's not all 12 disciples. Right. So it's almost like he had one group over here, and then he took like 3 of them with him, Peter and these 2 other guys, which I'm guessing is James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Is that right?
Don't ask me.
So then he took these other 3 with him, and then were those 3 falling asleep, or was it the other 9 of the disciples? I don't know. It's hard to distinguish, but point is, he basically went alone to pray, and whenever he came back, he just kind of felt, like no one really had his back in that moment, and because of everything going down.
And because they didn't.
So I know people give Peter a hard, Peter tried to fight for him.
True, but
they didn't understand what was happening.
Ultimately, they didn't know, and they did run in fear.
They didn't really get it, what was going down at that point. So, but I think it makes me laugh because, some people when they go to sleep, they wake up and they're irritable. Mm-hmm. They're a grouchy bear. Yeah. So Peter, in the next few moments, is grabbing a sword and swinging at people, right? And it just makes me think like he's sleepy-eyed. He sees the Roman centurion show up. Judas is back, and he's like kissing him. He's like, "What's going on here?" And he's just like he's all irritable. And I could be embellishing, but the point is, I could see a grouchy, just woke, middle of the night, sleepy, tired guy. Just had your big Passover lamb, a little bit of wine. And he's tired, he's grumpy, and then he's like, what's going on? And now he's being sobered, both from being awake and from whatever meal he just had because of the stark reality of what's happening with his Messiah, with his master. And of course he was extremely guilt-stricken for the rest of the narrative in the Gospels with Peter, until Yeshua kind of reinstates him later. But here we have a moment where, like we just talked about earlier, right? This was the Son of God who, as Enoch 47 tells us, was around before creation. As Colossians 1 tells us, the firstborn of all creation, we have the Son of God, now in the flesh through Mary, has decided he's going to do this. I will do this, not my will be. If there's any other way it's going to happen, let it be. But if not, your will be done, Father. And he's taken this moment with great anguish and stress to reaffirm to himself, thankfully for our sake, that he did it. He went through with it, even though he probably, from the prophets, knew everything was going to happen to him. You know, which is probably why he's so distressed. He's like, if there's any other way that this could all happen, I don't want to have everything happen to me that is described in the prophets. But thankfully, he had the courage and he overcame. And so he was faithful to the end, even unto death. And he willingly laid down his life in sacrifice, but not according to an altar sacrifice, as we read in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and all the instructions there. So he was not an animal sacrifice. He was what Hebrews calls a sacrifice of obedience. That's his sacrifice, was being obedient to the Father, even unto death, which is what we're called to do.
Right.
So, all right. And also the next place we're going to read in here is Hebrews chapter 11. Do you want to read this one, sweetie?
Yeah.
It's going to be in verses 17 and 18, chapter 11.
By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, in Isaac your descendants shall be called.
Yep. Boom. There it is. So, here we have Abraham. It just clearly tells us Abraham's being tested.
Yeah.
Okay? This is what we talked about earlier. God knew he wasn't going to let him go through it. The whole purpose was to bring about the seed of promise through Isaac, right? And so therefore he wasn't going to allow him. And it even goes on to say later that he knew he could bring him back from the dead as a type, right? And that's kind of what verse 19 talks about. He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, which he did receive Isaac back as a type of resurrection. Okay, even though Isaac didn't literally die, this is another moment of using this as a type, a simile, a metaphor of language being expressed here. So, and this is amazing. It's basically saying straight up, Abraham was being tested.
Yeah.
The Father was not going to allow his law to be transgressed. He was not promoting human sacrifice. He was just testing the faithfulness of Abraham. Okay? And let's read something fascinating here in Jubilees chapter 17. Okay? And this is actually the part where we get to see some extra behind-the-scenes insights to what's happening with this whole moment in Genesis 22. So here in Jubilees chapter 17, verse 15 through 18, it says, And it came to pass in the 7th week, in the 1st year thereof, in the 1st month in this Jubilee, on the 12th of this month, there were voices in heaven regarding Abraham, that he was faithful in all that he told him, and that he loved the Lord, and that in every affliction he was faithful. And the prince Mastema came and said before God, Behold, Abraham loves Isaac his son, and he delights in him above all things. Bid him offer him as a burnt offering on the altar, and you will see if he will do this command, and you will know if he is faithful in everything wherein you do try him. And the Lord knew that Abraham was faithful in all his afflictions, for he had tried him through his country and with famine, and had tried him with the wealth of kings, and had tried him again through his wife, and when she was torn from him, and with circumcision. And he had tried him through Ishmael and Hagar, his maidservant, when he sent them away. And in everything therein he had tried him, he was found faithful, and his soul was not impatient, and he was not slow to act, for he was faithful and a lover of the Lord. All right. I think it's beautiful, guys. Not only does it actually give us motivation behind how we responded with Hagar and Ishmael, but he also says to them these other things we read. Remember, he says he's tried with the wealth of kings. Okay. What Gerar gave him silver and wealth and animals and things like that. The book of Joshua claims that Nimrod actually gave him a ton of wealth when he tried to kill him and couldn't. It's a longer story for a different video. But I just think it's funny that we're getting some background insight, and we're getting this character Mastema, whom Jubilees chapter 10 calls Satan.
Right.
Okay? This is also who Enoch chapter 10 would call Azazel, and also Enoch chapter 54 refers to this Azazel guy who also is named Mastema. He's the guy called Satan that we would see in Revelation 20 called the dragon, the serpent of old, the Satan character. They're the only rebellious angel that has yet to receive his judgment, and he receives that on the day of the Lord. So anyway, the next portion that we're going to read is also out of the book of Jubilees, and this pairing is from chapter 18, verses 1 through 13. And it's the continuation of what we just read, this conversation this, basically Satan asking God, hey, if you do this, he won't be faithful.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, it's almost like the same thing with Job.
Yeah.
Chapter 1 and 2, where Satan comes before
exactly the
God and
same
he's like,
thing,
hey,
yeah.
if you lay your hand on him and take away his wealth and his possessions and his health, he'll curse you.
Right.
You know, and thankfully Job passed his test as well. But so let's read in chapter 18. It's the continuation of what we just read. It said, verse 1 says, God said to him, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, behold, here I am. And he said to him, take your beloved son whom you love, Isaac. Go into the high country, offer him on one of the mountains which I will point out to you. And he rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood of the burnt offering. And he went to the place on the third day, and he saw the place afar off. He came to a well of water and said to his younger men, I abide here with the donkey, and I the lad shall go over there, and when we have worshipped, we will come again to you. He took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. He took in his hand the fire and the knife, and they went both of them together to that place. And Isaac said to his father, Father. And he said, Here I am, my son. He said to him, Behold, the fire, the knife, the wood, but where's the sheep for the burnt offering, father? And he said, God will provide for himself a sheep for a burnt offering, my son. And he drew near to the place in the mount of God. He built an altar. He placed the wood on the altar, and bound Isaac his son, placed him on the wood, which was upon the altar. He stretched forth his hand to take the knife to slay Isaac his son. And he stood before him, and before the prince Mastema. And the Lord said, Bid him not to lay his hand on the lad, nor do anything to him, for I have shown that he fears the Lord. And he called to him from heaven, and said unto him, Abraham, Abraham. And he was terrified, and he said, Behold, here I am. And he said unto him, Lay not your hand upon the lad, neither do you anything to him. For now I have shown that you fear the Lord, and have not withheld your son, your firstborn son, from me. And the prince Mastema was put to shame. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a ram caught by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it on a burnt offering in the stead of his son. Abraham called that place that the Lord had seen. Called that place the Lord has seen, so that it is said, in the mount the Lord has seen, that is Mount Zion. It's beautiful, beautiful, guys, because we actually get the origin of the name Mount Zion. We get this extra interaction, how Satan was actually prodding this event, okay? Which is why the Father doesn't encourage human sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Satan's trying to trick everybody to get into some human sacrifice, because that's his operating procedure. He's always trying to get people to do his occultic ways.
Oh, one thing that I'm noticing here is what Abraham calls this place according to Jubilees. Because in Jubilees, he calls the place the Lord has seen.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Genesis, we have him calling the place the Lord will provide.
Yeah, the Lord provides because of the ram.
Would we call that a contradiction and then throw out the book of Jubilees?
No. Well, here's, we also have in Genesis and in Exodus, we have, and in the book of Kings, and in a whole bunch of places, we have Mount Sinai also being called Mount Horeb.
Right.
So there's often a couple places that have two different names, geographical places that'll have two different names, in Scripture. So this could just be another one. The point is, we've got all the same parameters, the same build-up, the same event, the same placing. And what's unique about their 3-day journey, remember in the Genesis 22, we get the 3-day journey. This one tells us here, they began that 3-day journey on the 12th, and then 3 days later, they arrived at the mountain to which they were told to go to.
Right.
And guess what? This was happening, as we read back in Jubilee 17, on the first month. The 12th day of the first month in the calendar year that Abraham kept, which is the Father's calendar.
Right.
So 3 days plus 12 is the 15th. Guys, this is amazing. Okay, let me show you real quick.
Yeah, we hadn't all this time we've been studying Jubilees and how much we love connecting everything to Passover. We didn't notice this till just this past week when we were studying this.
Check this out, guys. So in the same chapter we just read in Jubilees 18, the last 3 verses, 17 through 19, it says, after this moment, he pulls Abraham off. They use the ram that they found for the burnt offering. They go back to the men that were waiting on him. And it says, Abraham went to his younger men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt by the well of oath. He celebrated this festival every year, 7 days with joy, and he called it the festival of the Lord, according to the 7 days during which he went and returned in peace. And accordingly has it been ordained and written on the heavenly tablets regarding Israel and its seed, that they should observe this festival 7 days with the joy of festival. Yeah. Guys, we're reading about the beginning of unleavened bread, the 7 days of unleavened bread.
Yeah.
Okay? So,
and something that I didn't point out when we were reading it, but in Genesis, when those angels come to get Lot, He prepares for them unleavened bread.
There's a lot of suspicion and speculation that also happened at Passover, because what happens in the Exodus Passover, the righteous are pulled out of mass destruction.
Right.
Lot is being pulled out of mass destruction. So even though it doesn't quite give us the dates, it's some speculation. We do get the dates here that this Genesis 22 moment, which I love it, it's the first time the word love is used, it's the first time the word worship is used. 22 is the number of the covenant in Hebrew. We also get it happening on Passover and unleavened bread, which is, often called the Feast of Passover, which is an 8-day event, because Passover is the first day that kicks off the 7-day feast. Right? So they kind of interchangeably either call it the Feast of Passover or just the Feast of Unleavened Bread with Passover at the beginning of it. But the point is, and guess what? He's eating a ram, which is the Passover lamb. Right? Because Isaac asks, where's the sheep for a sacrifice? Right? So it's even the same ingredients for the meal. Guys, the Father has an appointed times that he does stuff, and this one right here is the beginning of Passover. And so what we're seeing here is why Jubilees tells us that when the children of Israel went into Egypt in captivity, then eventually they went there to live at the beginning, but then when a Pharaoh rose that didn't remember Joseph, they eventually put the children of Israel into captivity and forced labor, and they were forgetting the ways of Yahweh, including the calendar. That's why they had their calendar reset when they were brought out. And that's why at the very beginning, right before they were brought out, they celebrated Passover, and it was instituted as an eternal ordinance, just like it is for us. That's why in Matthew 26, something we didn't read, right before the Garden of Gethsemane moment, when they were actually having the Passover meal, Jesus makes the statement, I've longed to have this meal with you because it won't be fulfilled until we get to the kingdom. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but you can go back and read it yourself. Passover is still being kept in the eternal kingdom. It's an eternal ordinance, and the implications of it won't even be fulfilled until the day of the Lord happens and we're resurrected into the kingdom.
And that wrath is literally going to pass over us that day.
That's right. So this is a beautiful moment here, and I just hope that it encourages you and inspires you about how amazing the Father's Word is and how relevant it is to our lives and how all of it is pointing to His kingdom come. We want to keep everything in the context of His kingdom, which is called the gospel of the kingdom of God, which is what Abraham and all the prophets, including our Messiah, Yeshua of Nazareth, they all preach this message. Okay, so any concluding remarks, sweetie? This has been a healthy episode. We didn't go too long, but there was a lot to cover. So as always, I love you doing this with me. It's a lot of fun. And any questions you may have had, please put them in the comments. As always, please join us here next week on Shabbat night, Friday night, for Kingdom Portions here in Kingdom in Context. We really appreciate you. And anything you'd like to say as we leave?
Just as always, if you made it this far, thank you for watching. We appreciate it. Find us on Facebook. Come be friends with us. We're thinking about maybe starting a Facebook group to gather and study in, so that might be a thing soon. And as always, I just want to remind you the little catchphrase of our channel is context creates comprehension. And really, our heart, guys, is just for everyone to comprehend the Word to such an extent that they can effectively teach it to others and also deal with objections. And especially going through some of the stuff in Genesis, it's really good to be able to handle objections when it comes to some of these more rougher chapters.
Right.
So we just really appreciate you guys, and we love you, and we just hope that you join us next week.